Hi guys, this is chapter 18 of The Missing Found. When? Chip repeated numbly. Johann was thinking that maybe English wasn't his native language after all. Maybe he'd spent his first few months of life learning some other language, and maybe that was why he couldn't make Angela's word make sense in his head. Catherine started laughing. Oh, thanks, she said sarcastically. That makes everything as clear as mud. She flipped her hair over her shoulder. We already know the when. Chip and Johann were both adopted 13 years ago. 12 years, 10 months, and 4 days, to be exact, Chip said. Angela narrowed her eyes, looking at Catherine. Perhaps you'd like to hear my story before you dismiss it, Angela said. Please, Johann said. And he was proud of himself that he'd managed to say that much when he was feeling so jangly and strange. Angela looked down at the table, and it occurred to Johann that maybe she was nervous too. Nervous talking to a couple of kids? That didn't make sense either. 13 years ago, Angela said softly, I worked exactly 1 day at Sky Trails Airlines. Catherine opened her mouth, and Johann could tell she was about to say something snarky and mean. Like, wow, did you get fired after only 1 day? Or were you just too lazy to go back for two? Johann glared at his sister. He pressed his thumb and forefinger together and drew them across his lips. Universal sign for shut up. He closed the full force of his glare. He hoped the full force of his glare plus the gesture would let her know if you say one more nasty thing, I will throw you out. And Chip and I won't tell you a single word that Angela says. So you won't know a thing. Catherine coughed. Sky Trails, she said weakly. It's an old airline. Probably none of you have heard of it because it went out of business about 10 years ago, Angela said. It went bankrupt, didn't pay off its creditors. But I still get a disability check from Sky Trails every single month. Disability, Johann thought? That was for people who couldn't work anymore because they were too sick or, well, disabled. Angela looked as if she could run a marathon, even those funky high heels she was wearing. And anyhow, Johann had some vague notion that disability checks came from the government, not private businesses. Angela was looking around, from Catherine to Johann to Chip, as if she expected one of them to ask another question. No one said anything. Angela sighed. That 1 day at Sky Trails changed my life, she said. What I saw, well, you wouldn't believe me, and nobody else will back up my story. I know what I saw. I'm not crazy. Oh, Johann thought. Can people maybe get disability checks for being crazy, too? Angela shrugged. I can tell by your eyes you're already starting to doubt me, she said in a voice that was strangely choked. Johann wondered, why would it matter to Angela whether 3 kids believed her? But Angela continued, I'm going to tell you this anyway. I think I have to. Okay, Chip said. Angela clasped her hands together on the table, seeming to steel herself for the story ahead. To steel herself for the story ahead. During my 1 day as a gate agent at Skytrails, an unidentified plane arrived at the airport, Angela said. It was an unscheduled landing, completely unexpected. Depending on who you believe, either the radar was out of order briefly while it was landing, or it just appeared out of nowhere. Johann saw Catherine stiffen. I was evidently the only person who saw it appear, Angela said. The only person who was looking. Did it disappear too? And Catherine asked in a small voice. Angela shot her a surprised look. I wasn't planning to get to that part till later, Angela said, but yes. I saw something like that happen once too, Catherine admitted. Not a whole plane appearing and disappearing, but a person. A man. So you know what it's like, Angela said softly, knowing exactly what you saw, but thinking it couldn't possibly have happened like that. Second guessing yourself, having other people make fun of you because you won't say, oh, I must have made a mistake. Exactly, Catherine said, nodding eagerly. Any second now, they'd be throwing themselves into hugs, sobbing into each other's shoulders, proclaiming, nobody understands me but you. Can we get back to the story? Chip interrupted. That plane. Was I on it? Was Johan? Did it crash? Is that why we were listed as survivors? I want to look at the records and find out where it came from. Maybe talk to the pilot, Angela snorted. It didn't crash, but good luck finding any records. Or the pilot. But, Chip sputtered. Angela's look was sympathetic again. I'm willing to bet you two weren't on that plane, she said. There were lots of babies, and if I was listed as a witness and you were listed as survivors, that's the only thing I've ever witnessed where government agents got involved like that. But why were government agents involved? Johan asked. The plane landed. It didn't crash. Big deal. Somehow he could gloss over the whole appearing, disappearing part of the story, just as he'd glossed over it when Catherine was telling about the vanishing man in Mr. Reardon's office. He believed in unpleasant facts. He believed in ignoring unpleasant facts in hopes that they'd go away. An unauthorized plane landed. Angela corrected him. That's supposed to set off alert for the entire airport. There's a whole bunch of protocol to be followed in those situations that I, being new, forgot about. But when I heard the first baby crying, Johan thought, was I crying? Wasn't the baby with its parents? Chip asked, or some adult. Angela looked him straight in the eye. The plane was full of babies. 36 of them, she said, but there wasn't a single adult aboard. Chip laughed, a bitter sound in the sudden silence. What, babies were flying the plane? You expect me to believe that? Goo goo gaga, air traffic control, this is baby, plane one, over. He mocked. Sounds like something out of a diaper commercial. Angela fixed him with a steely look. The FBI's theory was that there had been a pilot, a co-pilot, a whole flight crew. They escaped somehow. Even though there were security cameras at the gate, none of them showed anyone leaving the plane before I stepped on. So maybe there was a secret door somewhere out of the camera's view, Johan said, or maybe it was an experimental high-tech plane that worked fully on autopilot. He was still looking for realistic explanations. But if experimental high-tech autopilot was the best he could do, he was really getting desperate. Do you think the pilot and flight crew just vanished into thin air? Catherine said, her voice ringing with confidence. Possibly, Angela said, or Jonathan prompted. Angela shook her head. I'll work up to that one, she said dryly. Chip will just start laughing at me again. I'm sorry, Chip said, though he didn't really like he meant it. You're making this all Twilight Zone-ish, but it seems like, well, that Mr. Reardon told Johan and Catherine sounds about what? What Mr. Reardon told Johan and Catherine sounds about right. There was some sort of baby smuggling ring, and they were forced to land. Maybe the police were shooting them down, maybe they just ran out of gas or oil, whatever planes use. But anyhow, the people ran away and left the babies behind because they didn't want to get caught. So really, as long as the FBI or INS or whoever looked at the plane, if they really looked at, I don't know, the instruction book in the cockpit to see what language it was written in, then there should have been lots of clues about where they came from. And surely they have all that in their records, and you forgot what I said. Angela said in a steely voice. The plane disappeared. Maybe it didn't disappear exactly, Chip said. Maybe they just towed it away and you thought, His voice trailed off because both Angela and Catherine were glaring at him, full force. I told you he wouldn't believe me, Angela said, and she sounded so sad that Johan felt guilty on Chip's behalf. Johan wasn't sure what to make of Angela's story either, but he wasn't going to tell her that. Shall I continue? Angela asked, meekly. All three kids nodded. Before I knew what was going on, there were FBI agents there and police and airport officials and airline officials and all sorts of other officials I couldn't even identify, Angela said. They were treating the whole airplane like a crime scene, a mystery to solve. But there were all those babies, and when one started crying, they all started crying. And you couldn't just tell. And you could just tell. It was driving those official types crazy. So they organized this baby brigade people carrying the babies off the plane. They were supposed to pay close attention to which seat each baby came from in case that was important. We didn't have carriers or strollers or anything, so we just closed off the entire gate area and lined the babies up on the floor. We were just lucky none of them was old enough to be crawling yet. Johann had been to the airport a couple of times, once when he was in third grade and his Cub Scout troop had taken a field trip to learn about planes, and once when his family had gone to Disney World and Dad hadn't wanted to drive. Johann could just imagine the chaos of 36 babies being taken off a plane at once. But surely it would have been chaos. Surely lots of people would have seen. Angela was still talking. The moment we had all the babies off the plane, and all the agents and officials and airline personnel were off the plane too, because they were trying to get the babies sorted out. At that moment, I looked back, and I could see the plane just like normal, just like I could see the carpet under my feet, or the rubber lining around the door, and my hand in front of my own face. It was there. And then it was gone. There was nothing there except air, and I could see straight out to the runway lights and the satellite dishes and the highway. Even now, 13 years later, Angela's voice was still full of wonderment. It's like she was still amazed, still stunned. And, once again, you were the only one who was able to see this? Chip asked, making no effort to keep the skepticism out of his voice. Angela turned her head sharply. No, she said. Monique saw the plane disappear. Monique Waters, my boss. But later, when Monique saw how things were going, she not at all. She was the one who filled up the disability papers saying I was delusional and prone to hallucinations and unfit to work at Skytrails. How do you know she saw it disappear? Chip asked. Because she screamed, holy crap, where'd that plane go? Angela said, grinning slightly. Johann was trying to absorb them. He sort of wanted to believe Angela. He was sure that she believed what she was telling them, but it was too unpredictable. What about the other people, Captain? And didn't any of them? It was dark out, Angela said. They were all carrying babies. You try to take care of 36 infants and still manage to think clearly. I think some of the other people might have seen the plane vanish, but then this one guy, James Reardon, yeah, the one we talked to, Catherine interrupted. Angela nodded. He started running around, taking charge, telling people, all right, my agency has the plane towed away now. We'll handle it from here. We'll advise you if we discover anything that's relevant to your department. Thanks for your help. And I kind of wondered, maybe some of those people had seen things like that before and had decided to pretend that they didn't exist, to be able to keep their jobs. It was close to Christmas time. They were happy to be sent home, or, of course, none of them had seen a plane appear from nowhere and vanish into nothing. So they could believe the official story more easily. Nobody went to the news media, Chip asked. Nobody put it out on the internet after the plane vanished, but just that there was a mysterious bunch of babies. Didn't we make CNN? His voice sounded mocking, but then Johann glanced his way. Chip's face was deadly serious. Angela shrugged. The internet wasn't the big deal it is today, she said, and we weren't supposed to contact any newspaper or TV stations. James Reardon wanted us all to sign confidentiality statements, but I refused. Is that why you lost your job, Johann asked? Pretty much. Angela said, Monique told me not to come back until I was ready to sign. I was never ready. I did talk to a newspaper reporter. I did call a TV station. But when everybody else said I was crazy, what good did it do? She held her hands out, a gesture of helplessness. Johann tried to imagine being like Angela, standing up to the truth. He didn't think he could be so brave. Why did it matter so much to you? Chip asked. I know what I saw, Angela said fiercely. I trust my own eyes, and I wasn't going to lie because I thought it might be important. I thought the babies might be important. I thought we should really investigate, not just pretend nothing ever happened. So you've investigated, haven't you? Catherine said, jumping ahead. Her eyes were glowing when she found a new hero. That's one way of looking at it, Angela agreed. A more common view would be that I've become a total crackpot, totally obsessed. My own family thinks I'm crazy now because I told them that my phone is tapped, that the government's watching me. But, sometimes paranoia is justified. I get paid for doing things. even though I've called many times and said I don't deserve disability pay. So I've decided to use the money to do research, to study physics. Physics? Catherine repeated. Clearly, that wasn't what she expected. Well, yeah. Angela looked down at her hands. Johann noticed she had fingers knotted together. She had her fingers knotted together, like she was suddenly very tense. Look, you're not going to believe me anyhow, so maybe I shouldn't even tell you this part. I've been working on this for 13 years, and it's gotten me nothing but scorn and mockery, and I've got no confirmation, no sign that what I believe is true. At least not since that first day. So maybe I should just pat your heads and tell you to run off and be good little children for your parents. And don't worry about where you came from. Don't be like me, obsessed and paranoid, and we already are, Chip said firmly. It's too late. Speak for yourself, Johann thought. But he was dying to hear Angela's theory, too. He couldn't walk away now, either. Angela took a deep breath. Okay, then, she said. One thing I saw that nobody else did, though I did report it when I was debriefed, before they began talking about confidentiality statements, was an insignia on the airplane. By the time everyone else saw the plane, it looked like any other Sky Trails regional jet. When I first saw it, the plane steward said, Trachyon travel, or Tachyon travel. Tachyon, Tachyon. They're all too young probably to have studied much physics, and anyway, this is very theoretical physics. So what's a tachyon? Catherine asked. She always hated being talked down to or told that she was too young for something. Tachyons are particles that travel faster than the speed of light. Angela said, the speed of light, Johann? What's that got to do with anything? I thought nothing could travel faster than light, Catherine said, acting proud that she knew that. Nobody knows, really. She said she was speaking very carefully now, watching for their reactions. At least nobody knows yet. The theories are that if anything could go faster than light, all sorts of weird things would happen. Time and space would have a different relationship. Aging would be different. And if the plane could travel that fast, it'd become a time machine. Everyone stared at her. Chip was already shaking his head. Who'd send a bunch of babies in a time machine? He asked scornfully. What would be the point? I don't think anyone sent a bunch of babies in a time machine, Angela asked, speaking very precisely. I think a bunch of adults got into a time machine. I think it was an experiment, one of the first attempts at time travel. They didn't understand all the effects, so they didn't realize what would happen when they arrived in our time. She paused, letting that sink in. You mean? Catherine asked. Johann couldn't tell if she really understood or if she was just prompting Angela. I mean that Chip and Johann used to be much older than they are now, Angela said. I think they were changed by traveling through time. I think they, and all the other babies, came from the future. All right, and that was chapter 18 of The Missing Found.